My name is John Caswell, and I'm going to talk a little bit about service design integration and G-Cloud and a little bit about SIAM, because that's what I was asked to talk a little bit about, service integration and management. But I'm going to tell you about how the Department of Energy and Climate Change, which is the department that I work for, I still do and did, got to where they are now buying stuff from the cloud in a multi-sourced environment. A warning at the bottom, note what I'm saying is my view, not Department of Energy and Climate Change's view. So I have talked about this with my boss and he's happy with what I'm saying, but it is my view. Okay, a little bit of information. DEC is a central government policy-making department. Oh, by the way, if you want to ask questions, stick a hand up and wave, and I will see if I can answer it. Based in central London, I think it's the smallest department, central government department, about 1,800 users in the main DEC organisation. Energy and climate change means what it says. It looks after energy supply, looks after all the bits about climate change and so on. It has oversight over a number of what I would call operational activities. For instance, it deals with the licensing of the North Sea oil extraction process. A lot of you may have heard of the deployment recently of smart meters. That's one of its projects. So it has quite a lot of projects running within the sort of energy and climate change arena. Until very recently, the IT was all supplied by a single supplier. The old monolithic service integration contract ended in April 2014. And I was brought on about 3 years before to start thinking about how we replace that contract. We started what we called the ITEC project, Information Technology for Energy and Climate Change. And its scope at that point was essentially the back office of DEC. Secure email, storage, EDRMS, records management, some line of business applications, VPN, LAN and WAN intranet connection, GSI, device procurement, help desk, and so on. So that was the scope of what we were having to replace, all the back office stuff. The DEC CTO at that point, and still is, decided and agreed with the business that they would retake ownership of the IT strategy within DEC. At that point, they wanted to own the strategy, the technology, the vision, the solution. You may remember I said that they had outsourced all their IT to a SI. Effectively, there was 2 men and a dog in DEC within IT. Little bit of underestimate, but not far off. So his decision was he wants to own their IT future. Not necessarily deliver it, but own it intellectually and control it. And that was the decision. One of the problems he'd encountered with the current service was that it was wasn't very responsive. As you can imagine, there was a single service, which was there were effectively a single SLA. So if you tweaked a bit on the edge, it could damage the whole of the SLA. So it was very unresponsive to user needs. So what we wanted to establish was a set of services which provided us reliability where it was required. So for instance, reliable email. But flexibility and responsiveness where needed or where possible. So if users wanted to run up a quick website to allow the energy organizations to give some information, they could do it on a couple of days and the information would come in. So reliability where required, but responsiveness where possible is what we were trying to do. We decided we'd use multi-sourcing to do that, so that we would buy reliable and stable services which did our strategic stuff that we needed, but also also buy the flexible services to allow us to move quickly as we needed to. So we go for multi-source, the best of breed approach. We pick our services and try and pick the best of breed suppliers for those services. And this about 18 months, 2 years ago, it fitted in roughly with where government strategy was taking us, because that was taking us down the cloud sourcing and so on. So that's in about 2012, 2013, as we developed our strategy. And I'll talk a little bit about now how we came up with the services. I'm skating very rapidly over about 18 months worth of discussion. So, services coming up behind me at the moment. The first service we established was we wanted to buy products. Now, I should state at this point that these are the services with regards to DEC. There may not be services that other people are interested in, but it's how we saw those services. We want to buy devices, computers, printers, laptops, tablets, telephones, phones, and so on. So there was a service we needed which would allow us to buy devices. We then wanted what we're calling a service integration service. Now, this doesn't necessarily integrate all the services, but what it does is it provides us a desktop that allows all the other services to be presented to the users. Amongst other things, it provides the desktop integration, LAN services, so where we had LANs within buildings, it looked after that, print services, and security and remote. So where we wanted to VPN into the service, they would provide that as a service. So if you will, they would build our laptops and allow us to log on to the basic system. There was no applications running at that point. It was merely just we got in to our network. We have about 3 or 4 different locations around UK. So we need a wide area network. So we then bought another service, a wide area network service, which allowed us to link all our locations together. And for your information, we were very early doors on the official, and we were official sensitive. That meant we had to encrypt our information, and we had to onshore it. So PSN, we bought the wide area network, and then we started looking at what we call the cloud services, the more general cloud services. So the pink box there is the cloud services we started to look at. And the first one we decided we wanted was Office Productivity, which is our sort of email document storage products. So we bought that through cloud, through G-Cloud. EDRMS, for those of you that understand, government has particularly stringent requirements on records management. So we needed an EDRMS service, so we bought that through G-Cloud. We also had a number of small, what I call the line of business services. So these were services that did particular things for a particular line of business. So I spoke briefly about the oil and gas licensing for North Sea Oil and Gas. That was a service that we run. So we needed that service within our portfolio. And so what we effectively bought was 2 services to do that. We had a hosting service, which hosted the service itself. And then what we have is a line of business support. So an organization that does effectively SaaS on top of the IaaS and PaaS. So they would support and run our line of business services on top of that. So those services we all bought through G-Cloud. Finally, the one we're doing at the moment, integrated communications. That is not G-Cloud, that's PSN. But nevertheless, the principle is there. We're getting a cloud service to bring all our communications together. And again, that is because our current service supply on both wired communications and wireless communications are ending in 2015. We want to bring them all together and give us a proper unified and integrated communications on the desktop across all the organization. So that was essentially the shape of our services when we came up with after about 18 months of working. And in about April of this year, they started to come together. So all from the left, the device services, integration, network, office productivity, EDRMS, line of business services. Integrated comms is slightly later. One missing, and that's service integration and management. At the moment, we've got a series of islands here, which operate independently of each other, and we decided that what we needed was a service integration and management service. We had to take a decision about the ownership of risk. In the good old days, when we had a single monolithic supplier, it was quite clear where most of the risk lay with that supplier, because they had to make sure that all the various services were deliverable to us. Now we have multiple service suppliers. On the previous slide, we finished up with about a dozen suppliers. There is no one supplier that takes responsibility for that, for the end-to-end service. If we look at the email as an example, that's a combination of the right device, the right desktop build, connection through the wide area network into our office productivity service, and then out into the, through our gateway, out into sending emails. So there are about 4 or 5 different suppliers involved in giving our users their email service. There's only one place really where that responsibility lies, and that lies with us, with DEC. There's no other way that we can do it, in our view. We did start to think about, was there an alternative to that? And we did ask a number of suppliers. Do you think that did they think they could take responsibility for overall delivery of all our services? And they said that without controlling the other suppliers, they didn't feel able to do so, or without us paying a great deal of money, neither of which it was possible for us to do. So we would have to accept responsibility, or rather accountability, for the end-to-end service. And we set up the in-sourced SIAM to deal with that. And I'll talk a little bit about that. Now, we moved, as I said, 3 men and a dog. We started off, when we started this process, with 6 people in our IT department. We've now got nearer 20. The skills are very different. We've got service managers, we've got relationship managers, and so on. We've got our own architectural team, we've got our own commercial team, and so on. So the number of staff within the IT department has significantly changed. So this now is our view of SIAM, and this, I would say, is our view. Oh, there we go. We call this our 7 pillars of SIAM. And I'll talk a little bit about each of them. But my personal view is that every SIAM needs this somewhere in it, and I'll talk about each one of them. The basic principle for SIAM is that everything that isn't a service in IT is somewhere in here. So the CTO sits in SIAM. All his staff sit in SIAM. So SIAM is what the IT is in DEC. It's not some thing sitting off to one side. It is everything. It is IT in DEC, because it is what makes all the various services work together. So we'll talk a little bit about each one of them. And there's one there that would be of interest to you, potentially. And I'll leave that to the end, because I'll talk about that. Strategy. That looks at what is the vision for the department. What's the policy that we use is, what do we do about innovation? So the strategy part within SIAM looks at all that side of things. The next bit is governance. We divide our governance up into 3 different types: strategic, tactical, and operational. So strategic governance is that which basically the CTO runs. It's a monthly or 2 monthly meetings where you look at the direction the department is going. What are all the bodies and organizations that sit to manage that? Tactical governance. That's sort of monthly meetings, the sort of things like the Technical Design Authority, the security working groups. These are a set of bodies that deal with that. And operational governance, that's effectively ITIL. So that's what we do on a day-to-day basis. So within the governance structure, we have a series of meetings and organizations that allow us to run to make sure that, I should have said at the beginning, all our service suppliers have places in here. So in the strategy mechanisms, in the strategy meetings, all our service suppliers are expected to be present. Also within the governance mechanisms, all our service suppliers are expected to be present. So it is, if you will, a virtual organization led by the department, but actually all the service suppliers are in there. And if they want to influence the direction they're going, then we're going, then that's where they need to do that influencing. The next bit is major projects. That is effectively project portfolio management. So it will look at the big changes that are coming up, set up projects to run them, if necessary, deal with the internal DEC projects, but essentially it deals with the major projects and then the project portfolio management and prioritization. Integration, that's at the bottom, but actually it's very important. What do we need to do to integrate all these services? And it's not just technical. Service integration. If we're looking at how we deal with the service management, how do you manage the integration of services across all the suppliers, of service management across all the suppliers? Security integration. All the suppliers need to have a common understanding of security, our security stance. So we need to make sure that it all integrates across all the suppliers. Relationship management really means, it's obvious, it's demand and supply. So we have a set of people that look at the suppliers and how we manage them, and also our customers, and dealing with the demand and supply management. Assurance. We reserve the right to assure all our suppliers are operating in the way that they said they were going to. So if they say they're going to have this particular security stance, or they're going to operate their service management in a particular way, then we reserve the right to go and check that that's being done. And the final one, which might interest you, and I'll talk a little bit more about that, is what we call service desk, which is the service management piece, which is ITIL. It's service monitoring. Because we've got multiple services out there, we need to monitor them to make sure that if something goes wrong, we understand what it is. So I come back to my email thing. If suddenly users can't use email, is it there's a problem with the machines? Is it the problem with the LAN? Is there a problem with the WAN? Is there a problem with our office productivity supplier? We need to understand where that problem lies, and that's what the service monitoring does. It monitors all the services and brings us and reports back to a single dashboard, so we can see if there's a problem with emails, we can click on the email and it breaks down and looks at the services that sit underneath it. And finally, help desk. We have a single help desk that triages all the incoming help desk calls and passes them out to the appropriate resolver groups. All the service desk is outsourced. We are getting a third party to provide that service to us. And I'll talk a little bit more about it now. The service management piece, as I said, it runs the ITIL processes on behalf of DEC. So whatever is required for ITIL, change management, process management, issue management, problem management, our service supplier runs that on our behalf. We remain the process, we are the process owners, but they manage the processes on a day-to-day basis on our behalf. They also do service monitoring. Microsoft SCOM is what they use. It's still a bit going through its teething stages at the moment, but in principle, any service supplier that comes on to supply services with us must allow us to monitor their services in real time. Otherwise, they don't get in to our little group. And what we will be doing is we monitor each of the services, and so that If something goes down at 3 o'clock in the morning, our service manager, if he wants to, can jump onto our dashboard and have a look and see our email is down, but actually it's the wide area network that's down, because he can drill down and see which bit is at fault. As I said, the providers have an obligation to do that. It's a mandatory requirement on all suppliers that they give us access into their system such that we can monitor it and make sure that it's running. And the final thing is they provide us with our help desk. It's a remedy-based help desk. Effectively, it's a central repository or a central call place where all users phone in, calls are logged, they do triage and establishing who the resolver groups are and pass that information out. The important thing there is that that help desk is a central authority for SLAs. So again, just as it was a mandatory requirement that our service suppliers allow us to monitor their services, they must update that service, that system. Whatever they do on theirs is entirely up to them. The thing that drives the SLAs is our remedy system, our help desk system. So that's what we currently have on the service desk, and at the moment it's outsourced. And you can see in my description of that, if we're looking at the sort of services that SMEs could offer, all of those are easily within the scope of an SME, each of them or all together. ITIL is not too difficult. Service monitoring, it's managing a monitoring system, and help desk, well, that's fairly simple nowadays. So that's what we have outsourced at the moment. And there is no reason, as I said, why suppliers on G-Cloud can't supply one or all of those. The last thing I've got is talk a little bit about the lessons we learned. I've already talked about this in some, or referred to this. We feel you're not likely to be able to integrate plain or commodity services from the cloud, all of them together, because they're all going to be defined as a particular service, and they're all going to be islands. So we found we have to extend in some fashion these services we're buying, even if it's only for governance purposes. So we're buying extra resources through Lot 4 of G-Cloud to allow us to do the governance management of those services and get them to take part in the SIAM service. I don't see how you can deliver cloud services without doing that. I just don't understand how that works. Our view is that SIAM is largely management and governance, largely. All the suppliers are part of that process, but that's our understanding. There's no bit of technology that allows individual services to integrate together that I'm aware of. And I've been in IT for 35 years. I don't think it's the only way we can do it from our perspective is to do it by governance. Cloud services, as I said earlier on, will need to take part fully in the SIAM governance process. Now, if you as a supplier are only supplying a fairly small service, then your involvement may not be great. But some of our suppliers are significant players. I mean, our office productivity service is a big one. It's doing all our emails, it's doing all our storage, it's doing our gateways out into internet and into the GSI. That's a big beast. And it's important that it works all the time, and it's important that if anybody does anything, they know about it and can do impact assessments on what we're trying to do. So our view is that they do need to take part to a greater or lesser extent. When we started, our view in G-Cloud was that services were relatively mature. When we actually got to it, on the one or two of them, there was only one supplier that actually was able to supply what we wanted to do through G-Cloud. We started off with 5 or 6, and as we got through the discussion and the process with them, more and more dropped out until only one was standing. I think it's better now, is my understanding, but nevertheless, it still needs to mature all the time. And as a supplier, I suggest, or suppliers, I suggest you do need to get close to your customers to understand what it is they want and try and define your services in those terms. I did hear just before lunch somebody up on the podium here saying something like, "Don't just rely on the cloud or you've got to go out and sell," and that's my view as well. G-Cloud will not replace your selling process. You've still got to get out and develop your relationships with your suppliers and start to understand what it is they want, start to communicate with them in a way that they understand that they can buy stuff from you that they want. G-Cloud is not, in my view, forgive me if I'm talking, saying something I shouldn't, as a buyer, it's not a means for me to find stuff easily. It's getting better, but you still got to get out and walk around your customers and start to talk to them about what it is that's available to them. It's still only commodity only, so the ability to change it is relatively limited. As I said, we can do a bit around Lot 4, around some of the governance processes, but even if you buy all your services through the cloud, you've still got to fill in the gaps because they are very unlikely to link mesh seamlessly together in a way that's usable. I think I've referred to this. Commercially, generally we give good value. When we went through this process, you may remember I said that we took this project through. We finished up with a net reduction in cost to DEC by going through this multi-sourcing arrangement. And that was actually pretty damn good because we had a very low original cost of ownership anyway. What happened was that the IT costs went down significantly, but the HR, the resource costs went up because you may remember we went from 6 resources to nearer 20. So we had some downward pressure in terms of IT costs and some upward pressure in terms of our SIAM employees. But by and large, the costs went down from a net perspective, about 15 to 20% in round terms. Still getting through this because, as I said, we're still learning. I'm not sure whether G-Cloud services can meet everybody's requirements. There still needs to be some flexible services that you need to buy to do exactly what you want. So I don't think cloud services is the answer to every man, but I think it will help you significantly if you can define, from a buyer's perspective, commodity services, and from your suppliers, can you define your services in a way that they're commoditized to the supplier. And this really repeats what I've just said. Can G-Cloud fit this flexible need? Unlikely in total, but it might do in the future. I think that if you can do the help desk piece, the service desk piece, that would be enormously helpful. It would help customers, because I think there's a big gap in that area. And that's about all I've got to say. Has anybody got any questions for me?
Hold on one sec.
I'm not sure I'll be able to answer, but I'll try.
John, thanks for that. Very useful. Obviously, in this transition period, your IT outsourcer is going through some change. I think it's Capita, isn't it?
No, the original one was Fujitsu.
Okay.
And their contract ended in April of last year. This year, sorry. So effectively, we brought on, in the previous 8 months before April of this year, we brought on 6 or 8 suppliers to take over all that service.
Right. And because they're having to go through cultural change as well. Could you say anything about that? Because as SMEs, we need to find positions in the sort of partner ecosystem or the cloud ecosystem of the future. So I'd just be interested to anything they've learned or through the process of how to work with engagement, because I know when Steve Kelly said if one of the big integrators is doing their job right, they're cannibalizing some of their revenue streams.
Well, I think that's right. I mean, it's worth considering. If you come back to what I said at the beginning, we're looking for best of breed bits services, and with the best will in the world, the big SIs are not best of breed in everything. So I think there is some mileage in the SMEs approaching some of the big boys to work out some sort of partnership for the things they're good at, and offer that process. Now, whether you finish up, I think from our perspective, we made a conscious decision. We did not want to go to a single supplier. So we wanted multiple suppliers, and therefore we didn't mind whether they were, we've got one or two that are really small, no more than 15 or 20 people. We've got some that are fairly major. So I think there's some benefit for SMEs in contacting the big suppliers. But equally so, I think that if you can find a customer like us who's willing to go with small suppliers, then go directly to the customer. From our perspective, we were pleased to hear from SMEs, because mostly they showed themselves to be fleet, agile, flexible in the way that they delivered services. And that's really what we want in most cases. I don't know whether that answers your question.
It's just really from the service systems integrators, what changes they're actually making to their business model that you've witnessed. Because you've made changes, but have you witnessed any changes in there?
Not really, no. But mostly because we're no longer looking at them as suppliers until such time as they come onto the G Cloud or onto cloud services and offer us nice small commodity services that we can purchase in a discreet way, and not land and expand in the way that they possibly might have thought they might do earlier on.
Anyone else? Hi. Usually one of the main reasons for going with a larger supplier is their financial security and the risks of going with an SME, the lack of that financial security. Is there anything about going this multi-sourced route that helped mitigate the risks of using SMEs? Is there anything they did in terms of acting as a group or buying through this framework that helped you, ease any concerns you may have in that area?
I think the approach we took there was that where we had what I call a strategic service, then we would tended to go for the M rather than the S, if that makes sense to you. So we'd look for an organisation that had some weight behind it. For instance, our office productivity service is fairly fundamentally important to us, and therefore it was important that the organisation we went with was going to be there tomorrow, and the day after, and the day after. So that didn't have an overarching requirement on us, but actually when we put our requirements together, it tended to encourage the smaller brethren not to pursue it, if that makes sense.
So there were some apps that you considered not as secure, and you were happy to go with the S?
Yes, absolutely.
Am I right in thinking that you share some contracts or suppliers with BIS?
Yes. BIS effectively joined our contracting process. Our original contract was actually a BIS contract, the history of DEC was that it spun out of BIS and DEFRA, and at some point about 4 years ago, DEC decided that they would adopt the BIS platform, and so effectively we were running as a subcontract on the BIS platform. So BIS's contract was ending at the same time as ours. We started a bit before them and established our approach and our strategy and procurement, and at some point BIS faced a problem and effectively came on board with our main contracts. So if you will, we own the contracts, but BIS are subcontractors to us in some of the contracts. But interestingly, they've got different services. So the key ones, which are the what I call the systems integrator service, the wide area network service, and the office productivity service, we have in common. But the other services are different. So they have their own EDRMS supplier. And because of the way we've built the system, you can plug in any service into the overall service integration service. So all you're doing is just presenting another service in through the desktop. So yes, BIS are effectively sharing some of our key components.